difficult conditions following the Boer War. They established the first South African lodge, and then the order was renamed, as you all know, the Hebrew Order of David by 1921. I find that the HOD taps the lives of most South African Jews. And with the emigration of many of these from South Africa in the last 3 decades of the 20th century, the order established lodges in Israel, the USA, Canada, and back in the UK, with a mandate to help members of our community and promote our cultural, communal, and charitable needs. Current times make you a very prime commodity. Your motto, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," you shall love your neighbor as yourself, is a core Jewish commandment derived from Leviticus or Vayikra and the Torah. Rabbi Hillel said that this was the main commandment, the rest was all commentary. It's not surprising, therefore, that this maxim has been adopted as a key principle of other beliefs, such as Christianity and Marxism, particularly as their respective founders were both Jewish. There should be no doubt, however, as to who originated this. I'm not sure that a rather sober talk on pensions on a Sunday night is the best way for me personally to live up to V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. But actually, I think there is a link between your mission statement and what is needed. So here goes. First slide, please. Can I have the first slide?
You have it.
Is it?
Nigel, can you hear me? Got it.
I can hear you. I hope everybody can see it. If Adrian will nod, if he's got it. They're all shaking their heads.
David, no, can't see it.
Hold on, I've just done it. Let me just share it again. Give me a sec. Yeah, let me share again if it's not there. Give me a sec. There we go. Yeah, 1 sec, please. This is a bit of a technical glitch. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. Share. There we go.
Got it. Thank you.
Next one, please. Okay. We've got problems, as we say. There's been a shortfall for funding for needs in middle and later life developing over many years. Every government and political party of every complexion has ignored the problem on the basis that tomorrow belongs to someone else. When I trained as an actuary, which was approximately when Noah was coming out of the ark, the average male retiree in the UK could expect to live 7 years. Now, for a similar individual, life expectancy is around 23 to 24 years, and women of similar ages live longer. After 42 years of marriage, I found out why. Put it simply, much more money is now needed to finance retirement, which can last 3.5 times long as previously. The problem is that most people didn't have enough before the pandemic, and it won't be easier in the new world that's emerging. Longevity comes at a price. Old age attracts diseases which aren't necessarily associated with reduced lifespans, but nonetheless require costly care at home or in a home. This care has got to be paid for out of retirement assets or income. If one spouse is sick while the other one's healthy, high amounts of money are needed to support both of them. But divorce can affect most of the 40% of the population and can ravage savings. Financial settlements and associated legal costs can devastate savings and restrict both the ability to save in the future. It's quite clear that people aren't saving enough, but the answer is probably because they just can't. The costs of London living make it very difficult to put monies by, particularly when there are immediate demands to service mortgages, high rents, children, as well as the social and communal costs consequent on living a Jewish life. Many families are balanced on a financial edge, hoping that nothing can go wrong, but it has, and it will be harder for us and our children. Savings incentives have been reduced. The working middle classes, executives, professionals, those that run their own businesses, face restrictions on what can be contributed efficiently to pension schemes. The plight of doctors and nurses in this regard has been well publicised. Governments have introduced taxation also on what they deem to be excessive pension scheme savings. But one man's excess is less than the cost of providing a couple's long-term care needs. Other taxes on savings, such as life insurance premium relief, have been eliminated. And with their removal, has also the will to save has been eliminated. Conditions generally are returning to what prevailed when HOD was founded. My contemporaries often have to support and supplement the needs of aged parents themselves, plus children and grandchildren, given the housing costs and the uncertainty of employment. Families now have to share housing. A sad uni friend of mine commented that he didn't mind so much his son and his family living with them, but he resented them requiring to come on his holidays. It's rather like how some of our grandparents and great-grandparents lived. But maybe COVID-19's made it easier. We now spend less, little or nothing on travel and holidays, not much eating out. There's no need to dress up to greet the Amazon, Ocado or Tesco man. But we can take little comfort from this and must have no false sense of security, as the world has changed forever and significantly. Short to medium prospects for employment, profits, and general investment returns have all retreated into the shadows. Next slide, please. I thought I'd set the scene for you, as this is a little bit of a depression session, and give you an idea of how much is needed to finance full retirement. I've assumed that most Jewish couples living in Greater London or Hertfordshire, and I apologise to those living abroad who are watching, would aspire to a joint income of at least £70,000 per annum before tax and index linked in retirement. Some people will say that's too much, but others conversely will say it's too low. I have to start somewhere, and I've chosen a level based on what I know most of my Jewish clients spend, which is anyway less than the cost of keeping a couple in a care home. Provided the insurance companies live longer than you, the assured way of providing an income for life is via an annuity policy. In the table, I set out the current costs of providing $70,000 a year for an individual at varying ages. For a single man at age 65, 3.861 million, or 4.773 if a joint pension is required for him, reducing by a third on the first death of him and his wife. This is, I might add, this PA means per annum. This means this is in addition to the cost required for housing, which I assume is taken care of. The figures are scary. Most people in the UK don't have anywhere near that amount of money, and funnily enough, neither do most Jews here. Of course, when interest rates are high, insurers price for profit, they hope you die and you hope you'll live long. I'm not recommending annuity purchase, far from it, but the numbers do provide some objective rough idea of the costs of financing retirement. But it's interesting how they vary with age. Deferring retirement from 65 to 75 involves an approximate 25% drop in capital required. The drop between 70 and 75 is of the same order. Of course, there might be intervening inflation, but my message is that many of you should prepare for stardom in my favorite movie, Carry On Working. Next slide, please. So what can pension schemes provide? I'm talking about the UK, and please forgive me. The basic state pension is set at just over £9,000 per annum. A number of you may receive up to double this amount because you were in a now abandoned state earnings related pension scheme called SERPs. By contrast, others might receive less as they retired before the current level was set and they couldn't participate in SERPs. State pensions used to be 65 for males and 60 for females. Now we're unisex, and the age depends on when you were born. If you're under 40, the age is 68. For those over 40 but less than 60, the age is 67. and thereafter at 66 or thereabouts. But we've been warned already that these ages are likely to increase as the true costs of pensions bite home. In the UK, we have a relatively new compulsory auto-enrolment scheme, unless you opt out, which started taking effect from 2012 on a dribble basis and is intended to augment the basic pension for employed but not self-employed people. The required minimum contributions are 8% of salaries up to £50,000, of which the employer must pay a minimum of 3%. The scheme is welcome, but it doesn't provide that much. The largest operator indicates that if a 40-year-old started saving now within that scheme, he'd get an additional flat rate pension, single life, not increasing by inflation, of £8,400 when he gets to 68. And for a 50-year-old starting now, he'd only get another £4,000. So the combination of state pension plus auto-enrolment won't provide even a quarter of my target income of £70,000. So additional pension provision is highly desirable. Individuals in the UK may make their own personal pension provision and or be part of an employer scheme. The government gives valuable tax reliefs on contributions both to employers and members, but they're not unlimited. Since 2006, there's been a limit on what can be saved up without incurring extra tax, the standard lifetime allowance. It started off at 1.5 million, grew under Gordon Brown to 1.8 million, but is currently set at 1.073,100. Funds in excess of this are subjected to a 25% charge before benefits are distributed. There are higher levels available for people who are in the pension system previously, but there was a deal with the devil. They could only retain these if they had no further pension contribution. The table in this slide shows what can be bought out if you've saved up the full lifetime allowance, which includes auto-enrolment benefits. I highlight at age 65, this won't even provide half my £70,000 target. The position is better if deferred, but even if you wait until 75, the total of state plus private pensions won't deliver enough. Further, government limits on what you can save up, pension contributions, will make it actually quite difficult to achieve the full lifetime allowance. Tax relief contributions are generally limited to 40,000 per annum, with the possibility of catching up on previous years missed, but these rates taper for high earners. Finally, it's sobering to note the cost of care homes, which have to be paid out of taxed income. And I would add that Jewish care home costs, including those run by Jewish Care, typically cost at least half as much again as the figures in my slide. Around £50,000 is the starter for entry into Jewish Care, unless you get subsidised. Next slide. So what actually is a pension? I think we have to view that pensions have changed forever, and the needed definition has to be altered in the light of recent history and the COVID experience. My definition is that a pension is a variable income or source of cash flow needed to support lifestyle whenever working income dries up or reduces, including at an early age, and doesn't necessarily have to come from a pension scheme. As work income can cease suddenly as a result of furlough, redundancy, loss of business, ill health, a pension may be needed to bridge the gap between what is required and what comes in at any time. Such pensions may need to be available at any age, but not necessarily last forever. They can stop, start, reduce, and vary in amount. As I've implied, most people will need to work longer if they can. For many, the process will involve a slow retreat from full working, with gaps, and the need for intermittent and possibly early access to funds. Income needs in older age will vary. Not working gives more opportunity to spend, but travel costs to work will be reduced, and there may be a tail end explosion of costs needed to cover care. People need flexibility in their pension provision, access to cash flow at key life events, including during a pandemic. Recent experience demonstrates that you never know what you'll need when you'll need access to liquid requirements. Therefore, if your cash requirements are likely to be variable and timing of benefits are uncertain, then pension schemes which only provide rigid defined benefits in an alterable mode may not be fit for purpose. Next slide, please. Well, why use a pension scheme? Basically, the answer is a slam dunk. It's fastly the fastest cupboard for accumulation of resources, because tax relief, unlike any other vehicle for saving, is given not only on funds accruing, no income tax on investment income, no capital gains tax on capital gains made, but there's a kickstart given because tax relief is given on contributions up front. No comparable vehicle, such as an ISA, has the same advantage. Further, there's the advantage of being able to draw a quarter of the amount accumulated tax-free from age 55. A pension scheme is not your money. A pension scheme savings is not your money. It's money for you. Therefore, it doesn't form part of your estate. And so inheritance tax doesn't apply. And in the event of death before 75, in many cases, the benefits can be provided in lump sum or income free to your chosen beneficiaries. After 75, there's no tax on the bequest, but taxed on income as and when it's drawn. There's one further slam dunk answer as to why use a pension scheme. Since 1999, pension scheme resources have been immune from creditors, including HMRC. And therefore, even in the worst of times, they're an asset on which you can rely, but except on divorce, because the only person that can get hold of your pension savings is your spouse. Next slide, please. In the UK, and worldwide, there are two types of pension schemes. They're money purchase schemes whose principal characteristic is that all the risks, the investment risk and the longevity risks are with the members. They include schemes like SASs and SIPs, group personal pension plans, and ordinary stakeholder plans and personal pension plans. They're very highly flexible. They often give a huge degree of choice to the member, and they're transferable to other schemes, but all the risks are borne by the members. By contrast, defined benefit schemes are only available from an employer. Money purchase schemes can be set up by an individual or by his employer, or both, and both may contribute. Defined benefit schemes, which provide a guaranteed pension set at outset, can only be offered by an employer, and they're potentially valuable, but not necessarily if you don't live long enough or if you need to transfer. They're inflexible, rather like Magnus Magnusson, the late. Once started, they can't stop. They can't provide varying benefits, and they may not be transferable. And even if they are, the transfer value paid isn't the full value of what you're giving up. They are guaranteed, but the guarantee is in the hands of the provider. And if you get a guarantee from the government, that's pretty substantial. But British Airways has long been characterized as a pension fund with wings because its debt to its defined benefit pension scheme represents a huge proportion of its capital base. Next slide, please. Well, what type of pension scheme should you have? If you're offered a defined benefit scheme, you shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth and should value the substantial commitment of an employer. You shouldn't give a defined benefit to yourself if you're a business owner, but you should recognize that the scheme is inflexible and you need to be able to trust the guarantees. Many of you, you all look very young when I saw you on the slide sorter, but some of you will remember Woolworths, and pension schemes guaranteed by Woolworths are not worth that much. Yesterday's Woolworths could be tomorrow's Marks and Spencers. Money purchase schemes provide the greatest flexibility, particularly if you're people on the move. Small self-administered pension schemes are the Rolls-Royce of them all. They're the most flexible and they meet family needs best. They can involve not just one person, but a family or a group or partners in the business. They can provide that they're not dead savings. They can finance back to a company. They can buy commercial property worldwide, and they can lend back to the company that sponsored them. If you aren't eligible for a SIP, or you don't have an employer to make this available, SIPs are the next best, but they are restricted these days in some of the investments that they can take in. For example, hedge fund, private equity, which are easily accommodated within a SAS, but not a SIP. If you live overseas or you have benefits overseas, you should give thought to maybe rearranging them. I'll come on the later slide back to overseas entitlements, but I would highlight at this stage that you do need to take individual specialist advice, which takes into account where you lived previously, where you are working currently, and where you will retire. Next slide, please. Okay. I devised the phrase cupboards of wealth, which I've noticed comes back to me at various points all over the globe these days. But everybody has the opportunity of housing their resources in different cupboards of wealth. Their home, their ability to generate income from working, their pensions and their other savings. And in a time when pension schemes alone won't provide enough to finance retirement, you have to interact all of the four cupboards of wealth and make sure that the coat hangers are in the right places. Pension schemes are just, in fact, another cupboard of wealth to be used and planned for interactively with the other assets. If your resources aren't enough from your ability to produce working income from your pensions and your savings, you may have to draw down through a home reversion plan to finance your retirement, even though this diminishes what can be passed on to the next generation. My gods, when I started my practice 41 years ago, were the accountants that fed me business, both of whom all of whom lived well, like their richest clients. I now have the honor to service a number of them who are well into their 80s, who frankly didn't achieve what they expected, a perpetual investment return of at least 5%. They've lived far longer than they thought, and they haven't been spared the universal tax called children. If you don't have enough from the four cupboards of wealth, then I'm afraid it's carry on working and maybe reduce expectations. But you can make your resources last longer if you go tactical. Pensions, apart from the tax-free cash sums, incur taxation on earned income. Drawing down from a bank doesn't. And therefore, a little bit of planning, making up the cash flow that you need in retirement from a combination of both, particularly when your resources are flexible, can make your monies last a lifetime. Next slide, please. The successive investments, whether in pension or other portfolios, can make a meaningful difference between a comfortable and a troubled life in retirement. Higher investment returns can make up for, at least in part, saving shortfalls. By contrast, poor performing investments, or indeed investment scams, can devastate what should be a golden time of life. All investments attract risks. Leaving monies in the bank because one is justifiably nervous about the current situation means that monies will deteriorate in spendable value as a result of inflation and may be vulnerable if the bank fails. UK bank deposits are only guaranteed up to £85,000, although I should mention that deposits with national savings, which are eligible for trusts, individual and pension funds, are guaranteed up to £1 million by the government and pay a running rate of 1.15% per annum currently. In a time when interest rates are low, dividends have been reduced and rental income from properties has reduced substantially, let alone the uncertainty and volatility produced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, on which is superimposed political uncertainty. It's definitely very difficult to formulate a suitable investment strategy, and frankly, many investment advisors are not much help. The fundamental minimal principle for pension investment that should be aimed in respect of all asset classes as well is that they should be invested so, at the very least, to preserve, protect and defend value relative to inflation, and to extend this where available, subject to suitable risk protection. It's easier said than done. Divining which assets will endure is hugely difficult in current conditions. Given this, it's also right to maintain liquidity at all times so as to enable sudden needs to be coped with, and then diversify other assets so as to avoid reliance and overexposure to any one type or sector. Historically, both equities and properties have outperformed cash and fixed interest investments, but which particular such equities and properties to choose at the current time is very difficult. The ancient principle of a bit here and a bit there has considerable merit now in maintaining investment values, but this has to be applied in the light of an individual's attitude to risk, which must be reviewed regularly. Finally, on this topic, when investing for future periods, it's important to remember which currency will be needed for spending. In recent years, the pound sterling hasn't kept its value against the Israeli shekel, and you know more than me that the South African rand hasn't kept pace with the pound. Ideally, pensions and other retirement savings should be made in investments which will match the currencies that will be needed when you take income drawdown. It's not difficult to achieve this in UK money purchase schemes, but it should be remembered that funds condemned or allowed to remain in defined benefit schemes or in pension schemes denominated in a currency unrelated to the intended place of retirement may deliver shortfalls. I'd like to deal a little bit with people on the move in the next slide. There will be a number listening, if you still are, who've come to live in the UK from South Africa and who may have accumulated pension rights there prior to their move. Others may be currently living and working in other territories, and there are some also listening who may plan to retire to yet another country. How to deal with the existing pension schemes and how to arrange future pension provision for all of these people is very complex. And my message is get specialist advice as early as possible. The country of origin, the territory in which pension rights are accumulated, and the jurisdiction governing where you live in retirement will all exert a gravitational pull on your pensions, on what you can do and what you get taxed. Some jurisdictions, the USA for example, has taxation rights over assets including pensions for its nationals and long-term residents worldwide. But the effect of these taxation rights might be alleviated to some extent by the operation of double tax agreements between individual nations, but the position's got to be checked out. The double taxation agreements between the UK, South Africa, Israel and the USA all operate on similar principles. pensions payable to a resident of one particular country are taxable principally where they live. Pension contributions paid for or by a resident of one country will be eligible for tax relief in the country of residence and won't be taxable in the country of origin, provided the relief doesn't exceed what is permitted in the country of origin. Members resident in one country won't be taxed on investment growth in another country's pension scheme. In the case of South Africa, when an individual comes to the UK and maintains contributions to a previously established South African arrangement, then such contributions may be eligible for UK tax relief. If the person concerned returns back to South Africa, pensions accrued as a result of contributions made from the UK are exempted currently from local taxation when paid. Finally, I would highlight that if a UK citizen who's established UK pension rights moves to Israel as a new immigrant, an Oleh Hadash, or as a returning citizen, a Toshav Choser, then it appears as a result of the protocol in 2019 to the double tax treaty between Israel and the UK, pension benefits paid during the first 10 years of Israel residence may be exempted from both UK and Israeli taxes. This is an extremely complex area, and specialist advice should be obtained as much advance as possible regarding whether existing arrangements are fit for purpose and whether they should be reformatted or relocated. In this regard, some territories simply don't allow international transfers. Pensions accumulated in the US can't be transferred overseas, full stop. The UK does permit international transfers, but they have to comply with quite onerous requirements, as otherwise tax charges of between 25% and 40% would be levied on any savings transferred. Finally, while dealing with pensions for people on the move, I would again mention that if you have accumulated pensions in another territory, they should be invested in line with where you hope to draw it. It's no great shakes investing in South African Rand in your home pension scheme in South Africa. If you intend to draw the pension in Israel, you will have an increasing disparity between the two currencies. Next slide, please, and I'm hurrying up. There are sharks in the water. Some are visible and some are concealed. Even in good times, the sheer costs of pension provision made early retirement unaffordable, other than people who were pretty wealthy or who were prepared to accept a relatively modest standard of living. Retired people from the professions, senior executives and small business owners who were regarded themselves generally as financially comfortable have already found themselves struggling as a result of lower than expected investment returns, longevity, and the tax called children. Prior to the onset of COVID-19, instability, including trade wars between the New World and the very New World, not least the resolution of Brexit, indicated that rocky economic times can be expected. The added effects of the pandemic and the anticipation of future such viruses are a changed world with difficult economic conditions for years to come. It must be faced that normal trading has been dislodged from its groove, and this will remain the case for some time. This will trigger unemployment, a loss of opportunities to earn a living and save, as well as asset volatility over all sectors in the climate of uncertainty. As we're seeing, this will add to the existing political tensions. Higher taxation will need to be paid for the help given during the pandemic, as well as for repairing social disadvantages and to generate future social cohesion. There's little that one individual can do to protect against these global fixtures, except work harder for longer and retain personal flexibility where possible. There are, however, some basic individual protections that can and should be looked at, which are relatively easily dealt with and which will cope with at least the financial implications of personal disasters, such as death, premature or unexpected incapacity, and the increasing risk of being a victim of scams and financial or cyber fraud. Next slide, please. This slide is self-explanatory. I don't need to give too much comment. These, I've headed out what I believe are the major insurances which you can pay for to give you extra security. Of course, there is a cost, but you each individually should look at the costs of each of the covers for death, for dread disease, for private medical care, long-term care, longevity, unexpected business interruption, including cyber fraud, professional indemnity risks, and also while traveling. It is of interest that you can, as of today, get travel insurance to cover the COVID-19 risks. How do I know it? Because I actually subscribed for it this morning. Next slide, please. What else can one do? I think the overall counsel for perfection for me must be that increasing savings is vital. This is very hard to achieve when personal income may be reduced. But on the other hand, there are savings on spending, shopping, eating out, entertainment, travel, etc. Where possible, savings made should be housed in tax-efficient or protected structures, pensions, ISAs, and maybe national savings to protect cash deposits. Individuals should plan on the basis that they may need more of their assets to support themselves in retirement, including the embedded values in their homes. Wills and potential gifts should be reconsidered accordingly. Drawing down resources in retirement should be planned. Taking money, as I've said, from cash deposits and ISAs attracts no taxation, whereas pension payments are subject to income tax. So ideally, there should be tactical drawdown to reduce immediate taxation and retain more resources for the future. All of you should make sure that you've got lasting powers of attorney if you live in domains which permit these. Otherwise, in the cases of incapacity, control of medical care and treatment and financial affairs can rest with under the remote office of the public guardian or with the court of protection, rather than with your trusted relatives or friends. Making a lasting power of attorney is a safeguard for you. It's not a safeguard for your children. It protects you if you're incapacitated or exiled because of maybe a pandemic. It means that in the event of such an occurrence, your affairs and care will be dealt with in the way that you want by your chosen people. All of your investments, including those in your pension scheme, should be reviewed regularly to ensure that they meet your current risk profiles and your liquidity, currency, and diversity requirements. You should make sure that your investments are housed and or managed by trusted, regulated, get-at-able advisors. Everyone now has to be flexible, embodying in their expectations, in their working and their spending. I've gone on for too long. Next slide, please. I was asked, given the rather huge order, to talk about pensions in the COVID-19 period. In an age of huge economic uncertainty, it's not right just to assume that all is the same as before. It just isn't. Pensions need to have changed as a result of the pandemic and other previous developments, and existing structures may no longer be fit for purpose or deliver what is required when needed. All financial resources will have to be brought into play for most people to make money's last a lifetime and a little bit longer. Many of you will be okay, I really hope so, but there will be some within both HOD and the wider community who won't be so fortunate. Our national and our communal charities are under huge strain, and I'm sure that there will be considerable calls on your members and others to live up to your core ideal of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your neighbor as yourself. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions and you don't want to go back to sleep, I'd be very pleased to take them.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Certainly some really useful information there, and I think so you did a great job in making a really complex topic succinct in 35 or 40 minutes. So fantastic job there. Just sort of along the way, you mentioned various places where specialist financial advice is required, and I think sort of the advice to everybody is, if you require assistance with any matters covered, please talk to your specialist financial advisor. There are some financial advisors who are members of the lodge as well as out there, and I think the sort of key message is these are really complex issues, so really important financial matters, so get some advice. In terms of questions, can I kick off with a question and we'll throw it open? So looking at your numbers, and I think it was on one of your earlier slides, if I want to retire at age 65, it's going to effectively require me to have £4.7 million to buy that 70,000 annuity for my spouse and myself. That seems really unlikely for me. And it kind of feels a little bit like going to try and buy an umbrella in the middle of a rainstorm. So what do you advise that we do now?
Well, one of the answers is that I've given is perhaps stop thinking about 65. You need to carry on working, not necessarily in the format that you have been, but you need to duck and dive and change. Secondly, if you're lucky enough to be in a final salary scheme, some of that cost might have been accumulated for you or will accumulate. You've got to check what you've got and plan accordingly. In the worst case, I suppose I'm trying to incite you to save more, but I suppose in addition to telling you to postpone, I may say to you, taper what you need or move to a place where you can draw what you need with lower taxation. A lot of our community is moving to Israel at the present moment in time for a number of reasons. But one of the features stimulating such moves is the ability to draw income there tax-free, which was an incentive first proposed by Netanyahu when he was the Israeli finance minister in anticipation of the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel in 2008. But that has been a huge incentive to move, because if you can draw down all your pension funds without taxation there, you've got a huge kickstart to the amount needed. I've said 4.77 million is needed at 65 to provide 70,000 a year gross. But if gross is equal to net, then you can reduce that figure by maybe 40%. The other thing in Israel is that they like Zakanim, old people, and even once you've gone past the 10-year period, they reduce your tax on foreign source pensions by 35%. So the 10-year period can slap on for quite a lot longer.
Great, thanks, Nigel. Just on the chat, there was a comment from Jack and a question from Jack. Jack, we're not going to ask that question to Nigel. I think he's not really going to comment on other professionals that are giving advice in this space. So people are welcome to reply to Jack individually. But
I'll just say that all SIPs are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, so that should give you some comfort. Okay, and there are bailout mechanisms. Okay, there you go.
Thanks. Anyone want to ask some verbal questions? We've got a bit of time left.
Just unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question.
There was a
Can I ask a question, please?
sir.
Nigel, that was just magnificent. Let me tell you, I'm a financial advisor, as many people on the thread probably know. And I mean, I've been attending webinars during lockdown. That is the most fantastic presentation I've attended in the last few months. You just covered an amazing amount of topics, and very, very thoroughly. Just a few things that I wanted to cover, if you don't mind. I don't want to hog this, but just for my own sort of dilemma, in fact. So I deal with a lot of sort of professional high earners, and, you know, this tapered annual allowance, which you briefly alluded to, is a big, big issue. I mean, you kicked off with, you know, the pension funds and the LTA, the lifetime allowance. And I mean, those high earners are going to get nowhere near it and not be able to acquire a fund if they're earning over, you know, in excess of £300,000 a year. I know they're not that many, but they are limited to now, under the new rules, as little as £4,000 gross per annum.
Yeah.
How on earth are they going to achieve a pension fund worthy of living, and how else, you know, they can utilize their ISA allowances and various other EISs, etc., etc. I don't want to bore the public here, but, you know, what does one do for those sort of clients?
Okay. My life is divided my working life is divided generationally by people who worked and flourished in the UK up to 2006 and who generated huge pension schemes. I've got some pension schemes which run to over £200 million for maybe 2 or 3 people. They're huge, and they're allowed to sustain because they were in it at the start of the new regime and they got protection. There are various weapons, particularly when the high earner runs his own company. It's difficult when they're an executive of somebody else's company or work for a public company. But in all cases, I've always characterized wives or husbands, please God, as weapons of tax destruction. If you run an owner entrepreneurial business, entrepreneur business, then dividing income streams between a husband and wife can increase the allowances for both, and that's one very simple solution. The next simple solution is that you can. This is to Mr. Technician, and thank you for your comment, which I will relay to my wife. Thank you. I thought you were about to attack me, but you were kind. I think that there is one technical solution called the defined benefit SAS, which can enable an entrepreneur-controlled firm or a company which wants to reward a particular executive to maybe multiply by 3 or 4 times what can be paid to a normal pension scheme with full tax relief. I'm just giving you that headline. If you want to give me a ring some subsequently, that is a vehicle. But my 3 answers to you are: number 1, use wives where possible. Number 2, and contribute for them, and that's usually available in a family company. Number 2, consider the use of a defined benefit SAS, which gives all the freedom but much more contribution space. And finally, if you can't do it within a tax-exempt pension scheme, use every other trick in the book, including ISAs within their limits, and offshore pension schemes if necessary, which don't get the tax relief from up front, but can nonetheless provide benefits which accumulate in the gross environment, which may be immune from creditors, and which can provide death benefits, certainly up to age 75, without further taxation, and which could also be transferred more easily if the person concerned moves abroad. It's not a complete answer, but those are several parts.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. There's several other questions I would like to ask, but certainly there's a lot of people on the thread, so I'd rather maybe have a private chat with you. Okay.
Okay. You're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? First of all, thank you very much, Adrian, for organising, and Nigel for a very informative talk. During the talk, and it's probably just a couple of seconds where I lost concentration, but you mentioned NSNI. So if, you know, for example, within a pension pot, if you want part of it sitting in cash, I assume that's what you were referring to.
I was talking about safety. And what I'm saying is, whether you make them personally or make deposits personally or through a pension scheme, the receiving banks in the UK only guarantee up to £85,000 per holding.
Right.
By rather surprisingly, National Savings and Investments provides deposit rates which are guaranteed by the government up to £1 million. An individual can have them. I put this in deliberately, and I hope that somebody would pick it up, because I was trying to give a hint to you all personally, as well as for your pension schemes. And each individual has got a limit of savings up to £1 million. The rate is 1.15, which isn't bad for instant access returns, far higher than most of the clearing banks. But the government guarantee all such deposits up to £1 million. You can have one for a husband, one for a wife, one for each child, one for a partner, one for a pension fund, and they all benefit from the same. The pension fund, unlike the individuals, receives the income gross. Okay, so not as a long-term investment, but as a tactical house for liquidity, National Savings isn't bad, and it's got the highest guarantee available. But you can put it in SIP, you can put it in a SAS.
Thank you.
I'm glad you picked one up, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to just on death benefits, Adrian and Nigel. I mean, just the significance of, you know, your expression of wish on your pension funds. I mean, that is just so vitally important, because a lot of you know, clients won't even tap into their pension funds under the pension freedom rules. Now they can, you know, pass those on to their beneficiaries. I mean, you alluded to pre-75, but even post-75, it's an extremely tax-efficient inheritance tax investment vehicle. And I mean, you have to have your beneficiary listed correctly.
Okay, can I deal with that? Because I've actually had a case in the office which came in on Friday, which demonstrates this, and I was called in as an expert. Basically, if for say where people have got protection of higher lump sums, or for pension savings up to the limit, if somebody dies, God forbid, before they're age 75, you can distribute benefits from the pension schemes in two ways, and they don't get included in the computation of inheritance tax. You can either pay out lump sums to chosen individual, or you can leave a pension fund as a going concern to your chosen beneficiaries, and who any such monies received aren't roll up gross, and if they draw down at any subsequent time, they receive what they choose to draw tax-free without limit. And the limit and monies received that way doesn't interfere with the lifetime allowance. Now, you can't dictate through a will what happens. You have to write a letter of expression of wish to the trustees. The case I had on Friday was that the trustees didn't accept the client's letter of wish. There was a one monolithic trustee which decided to include people he specifically didn't want to get as trustees, so to get the benefits. So what I'm saying is, it is of course right to do what Jeff says, write a letter of wish to let the people who run your pension scheme know what you'd like to happen to the money. But the best thing is to choose a pension scheme where you can pack the trustee board with people who do, to misquote, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," that they pay out your monies in the way that you want. The particular case I had was of a very famous entrepreneur who wasn't a client of mine, but whose lawyers came to me and said, the trustee isn't playing ball, what can we do? and I made some suggestions of what they could do, which included me ringing up the boss of the other pension firm as I trained with him and asking him a favour on the quiet. But that's the difference between the Jewish and the non-Jewish, actually. But what I'm saying to you is, it's right to get the expression of wish right, and the expression of wish should dovetail with the will, because in general terms, wills can provide spouses with monies tax-free. But to everybody else, apart from the threshold allowances, everything else is taxable as inheritance tax. A pension fund can pass monies down a generation or two, or sideways, without taxation. Even if you die after 75, you can make a huge bequest, and the worst that can happen is the recipient will only pay income tax depending on where he or she lives at the time of drawing and what they actually draw. If I left Adrian £1 million and I died at the age of 76, he wouldn't pay tax on the £1 million on the bequest. But if he drew a nod £50,000, he'd only pay £50,000 at the time of drawing, tax on £50,000 at the time of drawing. So my message is, try and get into a format, and that includes the gentleman who asked the question about the security of the SIP. Make sure that your trustees will do what you want, because it's not a given, and the law says they have total discretion.
Great, thanks. So we said this would be an hour, and we've run just over an hour. So if there's any final questions, please sort of raise them really quickly. Last chance. Okay, great. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining. I think we've had some from the US joining us. So good afternoon to you, and thanks for joining in the middle of your Sunday. And we've had some from South Africa, and it's a little bit later for you. And then for those of us in the UK, all have a good evening. Just Nigel, thank you really so much for a brilliant talk and some really gems of advice, particularly in the Q&A. Thanks for your preparation, and the presentation has been recorded, so some of our brethren that couldn't join tonight will be watching this this recording, and I hope everyone found something useful from it. Thanks very much, everyone, and good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.